Welcome back to the Automation Podcast, the world's number one industrial automation product and technology show. Thanks to you, our audience of highly skilled automation professionals. Thank you for being a member of our audience, and thank you for tuning back in this week. Now, for those new to the show, my name is Shawn of Insights in Automation, and each week I invite a new vendor to come on the show to tell us about their products and technologies. And during their presentation, I play the role of the audience, asking questions I think you might have and questions I have as well. Now, given that a quarter of our audience listens to the show, not watches, but listens to the show, I'll also try to call attention to any details and any visuals we pull up. With that said, I do want to welcome first time on the show, Tony Carrara, who I'm a big fan of. And Tony, thank you so much for coming on. I'm really looking forward to talking about the topic we're going to talk about today, Design Studio and Generative AI. But before we get into that, can you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Shawn, for having me on here. So, like you said, my name's Tony Carrara. I'm the business manager for a product called FactoryTalk Design Studio in Rockwell Automation. I've been in Rockwell in various roles for just over 25 years, and I think I could also say I've been in this industry for 30 plus years. That's what we do when it's beyond 30 years.
Yeah, I love that. I always say, like, I think I'm at 34 now, so it's like 30 plus is easy.
Yeah, that's what I roll with. So I'm really excited to kind of share with you and your listeners this product called FactoryTalk Design Studio. And I know we released it in October of 2022, but it's a cloud SaaS-based design tool for control and compact Logix controllers. So thinking about where Studio 5000 Logix Designer and before that RS Logix 5000 has sat for creating programs for the Logix platform, we took the journey to expand into the cloud. We had a lot of customers saying, we're doing a lot more with cloud tools. Rockwell, what are you doing for your design tools? So that's where we basically expanded, not replacing Studio 5000, but expanded into the cloud with a couple paradigm shifts from Logix Designer. But that's what we came out in October of 2022.
Okay.
And what we do is, it's one of the benefits of being in the cloud. We do quarterly releases. So every quarter we do an update. Some have a little bit more content than others, but we've come out, each quarter since the end of 2022. And I think if, between yourself and others that know Logix Designer, where it's set, obviously installable on a laptop, you enter, you name your controller, and you start building content in that controller. And so it's a single controller project. And what we did in Design Studio was obviously a modern technology stack that we wanted to build to give us some longevity. But we also took that and made it multi-controller. So in a same project, I could put more than one controller. And you could just imagine the times where you might have two controllers in a system with Logix Designer, and you have two instances of Logix Designer. And you're kind of manually creating those relationships. In Design Studio, that's why we wanted to do multi-controller, because the opportunity to have relationships across controllers, share content across controllers much easier. That was a big driver for us. And then the other one that we wanted to do, which anybody that's done a controls project, when you're working with other controls engineers, how to collaborate, whether it's in a project or in the same controller. So what we did is we integrated a version control system underneath Design Studio.
Oh.
So it's an integrated VCS, but what we did is we kind of abstracted that away from the user. So we simplified the experiences of kind of pushing and committing into a repository and pulling. You don't have to leave Design Studio to have those interactions.
Oh, nice.
And get notifications. So if you and I are working on a project together, you make a change, I'll get a notification of that you've committed changes in, and then I could do a compare to see if what I want to do with those changes. Maybe I want to overwrite what I have. Maybe I want to do a merge with what you're doing, but All of that's available within Design Studio.
So in its current form, so I guess we can all see the benefits. There are some applications, some use cases where doing work in the cloud is better. And I know a lot of the audience is cringing. I'm not letting go of my laptop and my perpetual license, and I can work offline, which I have to in so many plants. I get it, guys. I'm with you. I'm with you. I hear you. But there are use cases for cloud, and one of the ones that comes to mind is you're working in a large office with a lot of corporate engineers. I've been to these places, and they have to pick up each other's projects as things happen. It can even also be for integrated sharing development of or OEMs or custom machine builders. And so there are use cases for developing in the cloud, especially when you're sharing the projects a lot. And so I guess the first question that comes up though is like, so typically when Rockwell does something like this, they have like a floor level version that they start out with. And so I guess my first question would be, so people who are, it's been out since 22, so people are using this. How far back do the versions go?
Yeah, we had a lot of discussions about that, and we decided instead of going too far back, we went with V34 and forward.
Okay.
So V34 and forward, and we stuck to the L8 platform
Okay.
for Logix, just to try to say Logix Designer isn't going anywhere.
Yep.
So for those that want to go to the cloud, experience this, where we wanted to start at a later point. You can import L5Xs in, so you can import files in and then start there, but you're picking V34 and forward for the firmware version. And one thing I think it's an interesting point around kind of the risk adverse nature of kind of our industry. So when we first started Design Studio, we had a progression where we were going to start as an installable product and work towards the cloud.
Oh, all right.
And we were building it out, but we wanted to pick technologies that afforded us to then be. So we wanted to be in a browser, so web-based front end. We wanted to pick services that lent themselves towards the cloud to get there. And just like a lot of people, the pandemic changed a lot of attitudes. Whether it was people, you're not coming into the office, you're working remotely from each other,
Hmm.
sometimes in the same city but remote from each other. Sometimes, you're located across, definitely not around each other. So how people were like, what can I do? How can I leverage this and really collaborate? So I think a lot of attitudes changed with the cloud, and it also changed our attitude. We decided to pivot, and instead of going with the installable on-prem version of Design Studio, we said, you know what? We're going to release it as cloud to start. So there's nothing to install on your laptop. You're really just needing a browser and you're connecting to the cloud. Um, and in full disclosure, we do see people that are still hesitant more from a when you're in the plant, in the manufacturing facility. So it's very conducive for I'm an SI and I'm an OEM. You have really good connectivity typically to the internet. So you're able to store things, you're able to work in that environment. But we have seen attitudes change from a manufacturing perspective where, and if you think about it, in our industry, it's the same pattern as when everybody started talking about analytics, and I'm going to send data to the cloud and crunch the numbers in the cloud.
Yeah.
And you had a lot of people saying, I am an air gapped system. I am not sending anything to the cloud. And then over, like, let's say 5, 6, 7 years, you're like, the value of it, as long as we're securely connected,
Hmm.
sending that to the cloud, we can do that because the value increased to a certain point, the ROI increased. And we see the same thing for connecting tools, like a design and dev and troubleshooting tool in the cloud. We see large customers, large end users embracing it a little bit faster than others because they have the infrastructure to support it. They understand they want that value, whether it was the pandemic changing their mind or not, but it very much started being embraced more by, again, your large, manufacturing facilities that have the infrastructure to do that. Um, but you brought up the point around installation, and the one again we talked about how long we've been in this industry. The fact that there's nothing to install to work on Windows compatibilities.
Yeah.
There's nothing when Windows gets updated on what just happened to your installation of your products. It's also, you could tell it's very IT friendly because they're like, they don't have to manage all of the installs across all of their
Hmm.
engineering laptops. So it's like, no, you just have to manage what's the browser that you're using to attach. And we see a lot of value in that. No installation time, no reading the order that you want to install the product. It's like you get access and you're kind of the time from access to building something is very much much shorter than it's ever been for an installable product.
Yeah, and I want to ask you this though. And I can see the benefits there. I'm sure there's like a license pool, where if you're a big company, you can have 10 licenses, and any 10 of your guys can attach to it, kind of like what we used to do with FactoryTalk activation. Is that a feature?
Yeah, what we have is it's a yearly subscription,
Okay.
so it's going into and I'll back up. Rockwell did came out with a Factory Talk Hub offering
Okay.
a
Yes.
few years back, and they do across our long-standing marketing kind of mantra: design, operate, maintain.
Hmm. Hmm.
And Design Studio is obviously in the design hub of that. So what you have is you get a yearly subscription, and it gives you a year access
Okay.
to that environment. And what you really have is you set up a cloud tenant or an organization, and then that's where you put your projects in.
Wow.
So what we expect is a company will set up their own tenant, and then any project that company does would be in that same tenant.
Hmm.
And we're working on the ability where you can securely move projects from one tenant to the other. Thinking of the use case of, I'm a system integrator, all my projects could start in the same tenant.
Yeah.
But when I'm going to commissioning and I'm going to deliver this to an end user,
Hmm.
how do I transfer that to their tenant?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so you could see it that way. We're currently a no charge subscription since we came out in 2022. So it's a no charge entitlement, is what we're calling it. We're going to introduce a paid tier. So we'll have a no charge tier and a paid subscription that when we introduce it later this year. But somebody can still go in and gain access to the no charge environment. And you could look at it as the no charge will basically stay as your offline development. You won't be able to attach and go online with a
I see.
controller or do
Yep.
the rest. But I could build my code, I could add devices in, I could configure my profiles, I could work with other controls engineers so the collaboration will be in place. But when you actually want to, the main driver will be when you want to deploy it to a controller, that build and deploy capability will be part of the paid for subscription.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And we're going to share the trial link at the end here. Now, I'm wondering, and some people may be wondering this as well. Um, does this now mean Rockwell has to maintain two versions of version 34, two versions of version 35? I mean, have you doubled the work of your engineers by having Studio 5000 and Design Studio?
Yeah, really great question. I think so. The Studio 5000 and Logix designer team, that is a separate team building out that roadmap, developing it. Design Studio separate, but it's unified at the firmware, so it's the same firmware.
Ah,
So
okay.
I don't. In that early on, you could imagine that was a big debate. Do we have a Design Studio V34 and a Logix Designer
Yep.
V34? And instead, no, it's the same firmware version. Um, One thing, though, to add on to that point is similar to when a Logix Designer is used to develop a system.
Hmm.
You're able to download, you're able to upgrade, and then re-download. There is a separation there where if you use Logix Designer to build it, Design Studio can't really recognize that controller. It's
Okay.
V34, but it's only when it's developed by Design Studio and I download that project in, then Design Studio can access it. That might change down the road, but the big difference is that the software does different things. So
Sure.
there's different capabilities and different tech stack, but it is separate from that perspective. But it's still the same V34 and forward firmware.
Yep. Okay. So that's very important to know.
Yeah.
I'm also curious, like the look and feel. Did you guys like try to modernize it? Like do like a new interpretation of what Logic's Designer is? Because I think everybody's familiar with the latest refresh of Logic's Designer. It looks pretty modern compared to like RS Logic's 5000, right?
Right, right.
What did you guys do in that area on the look and feel? Did you do anything different?
Yeah, so it's a very fair question, and we coined the phrase "new but familiar."
Okay.
So it's still, it's still a ladder logic editor. It's still a properties panel. It's still an instruction toolbox. The differences are, and we did an amazing amount of user research on this
Okay.
because we want to understand where are things that could streamline the experience, where are areas that maybe could help drive productivity. And Shawn, I mean, again, full transparency, there are people that just want it to be Logic's Designer, just want it to be, whether it's the look and feel, whether it's how things are represented, even to the keyboard shortcuts. Please don't change the keyboard shortcuts. But I'll give you an example of something that was very much embraced. So if you're in Logic's Design, you're developing a ladder logic routine, and and it's been in there a long time, where you double click on the rung and it gives you that neutral text. And people will double click on a rung and they're just starting to type.
Yeah.
They know these XIC, OTE, XIO, and they're putting their tags in. Very, very popular. Will continue to be popular. But what we ended up finding is how popular that is. We did find there's some constraints to that. So what we did is, instead of just doing it rung by rung, I could look at a ladder routine in another editor that is all the neutral text together. So I could see the
Oh,
neutral text for the entire routine.
that's
And
cool.
now, if people want to really look at that, they're more familiar with that. I don't have to go rung by rung. I could just look at that in what we call a code editor. And you could imagine people that have been doing control logics or logic systems for a long time. That's kind of like their area, that's their comfort zone. They could look at that. So when we brought that to, again, Rock Live Automation Fair, different training,
Yep.
you saw people gravitate towards that. And the one, when you first see it, you think it's structured text.
Oh,
And because
okay.
but it
Because it's
really is.
formatted.
Yeah, it's formatted that way, but it's something we decided to do, and it's called a domain specific language. And why we did it, it's basically we're rendering that as a ladder editor,
Hmm.
but we wanted to do that because that's the underpinnings to any graphical language we would put in Design Studio. It would all come back to that neutral text, the domain specific
Yeah.
language. And a future aspiration we have is, let's say somebody wants to design it in structured text. That's what the system integrator or OEM wants to do, but the end user only wants to see ladder. To give the ability to allow the end user to view it as ladder if they want later, but
Hmm.
build it in a different way early on. So it's that flexibility that's part of a aspiration, that is foundational to have this domain specific language.
That's cool. I know I would like that. I'm sure some of the listeners are too. For anybody who doesn't know the origin of XIC and OTE, check out my article on Rockwell's first PLC, or Alan Bradley's first PLC, which is actually the PDQ-2,
Mm.
because of the acquisition back then. But in any case, yeah, I'm a XIC, OTE, NXB, BND type guy. Um, so, and I should have put it in there, BST to start the branch. But let's talk about connections. So let's say you do have a version of Design Studio
Mhm.
to that can connect to the L8, right? Do I install RS Link? Do I have to install RS links or
Oh,
FactoryTalk links?
yeah. So what we're introducing, and it's actually going to be introduced at Automation Fair,
Oh, okay.
where we're leveraging another product that is more typically related to optics, FactoryTalk Optics, called the FactoryTalk Remote Access.
Oh, okay. Yep.
And that is that secure VPN tunnel that will be put in place that
Oh,
allows you to go from your cloud project to a physical controller. And you set up a number of endpoints, just like optics users are learning to do as they want to set up that kind of connectivity. But what we're putting in place is FactoryTalk Optics, FactoryTalk Remote Access, which can be in an appliance like the Stratix 4300,
hmm
can also be an install on your laptop. So I can install remote access on my laptop, set it up, and then use that as the VPN tunnel to hardware. So if you kind of play through that last part, you're on commissioning, you're using Design Studio, you're going from a browser on your laptop up to your project and coming back down through FactoryTalk Remote Access to your devices.
Yeah, we actually had the Rockwell remote access guys on earlier. I think it's probably a couple years ago now. But for those of you who listen to the show a lot, you hear me talk about FactoryTalk Optics a lot as far as the optics panel. But there is a virtual version of that. Is that the Operate Hub? Help me out here, Tony,
Oh,
because there's
yeah,
a virtual, there's a cloud-based optics as well.
yeah, that does, and I think it is under the operate section.
Okay.
It's kind of one of those odd ones where just like Factory Talk View, you've got Studio and then you've got Runtime.
Yeah.
So the Optics Studio, I think it filters. Now that I think about it, I think it filters under Design Hub,
Oh,
but
yeah,
it
yeah.
is part of the hub, and you can access it there. You could access Factory Talk Remote Access, kind of their UI to set things up from there. Um,
So you
but
have a new
yeah,
driver that I don't have to install
yeah.
RS Links. And the only reason I'm,
No, there
yep,
we have links behind the scenes
sure.
as a service that we've taken away. And what you'll end up seeing that if you really look, how you'll experience links is through the browser. So
Mm-hmm.
as you're browsing your devices that are your endpoints,
Mm-hmm.
that's technically using the Factory Talk Links browser that browses your devices. Then you set those up and go from there.
Yeah, and we did have the Factory Talk Links folks on, and they have done just so much great stuff with that. I guess I started out with version one, so
Oh, I
you
bet.
get some.
Yeah.
I think we all have some history there, but no,
Yeah, whether
the
it
latest
was
version.
RS Link Classic, then became RS Links Enterprise. Yeah, quite a
Yeah,
history.
WinLinks
Yeah,
and
right.
the
Right.
original. I think the original RS Links Enterprise for the Panel View Plus, the version three was where a lot of people get a little heartburn, but it is not your grandfather's factory. It's not your grandfather's RS Links Enterprise. Factory
Right.
Talk Links has come a long way and has so many great features. So this is very interesting now. What languages that we talked a lot about relay? Is it only relay ladder logic right now, or relay ladder diagram, or are there other languages included?
Yeah, so we want to have all the languages that are supported in the Logix platform. We started with ladder, and I think everybody realizes that's still the most pervasively used language in the installed world
Yeah.
for PLCs. So we went with ladder. We'll be bringing in structured text and function block. Structured text definitely in early 2025,
Okay.
and hopefully FBD shortly after that. We're determining the timing on SFCs when those might appear. Those still always sit on the edge of from an adoption standpoint,
Yeah.
but those top three are really huge for us. So having that support, starting with ladder, going structured text, and then FBD.
Excellent. I imagine you're probably pretty close on structured text already based on what you're already doing. And structured text is just seems so much like ladder when you look at it in a text format. But again, it has its own all its own rules. So what would you say? And maybe this is a good time. You tell me if I'm wrong. But I think one of the features you're also building into this is generative AI. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, no, thanks, Shawn. Yeah, it's tying back to what we were talking about with the domain specific language. code editor. That ended up being a huge enabler for us. But just like everybody saw, the end of 2022, ChatGPT comes out. It enters everybody's imagination. And I think most people in automation started saying, well, how can this help me?
Sure.
So just like probably yourself, I did the same thing. Most of your listeners went into ChatGPT and said, create me PLC code for pick your PLC family, what you wanted it to do. I know typical ones, create me PLC code to turn on a pump, open a valve, a temperature loop, just to see what it did. And what we found is kind of there was always this code snippet that would be produced and then this narrative around it. And the narrative is what showed the potential in ChatGPT, but the code, I couldn't pick up that code and drop it into either Logix Designer or Design Studio. So we were looking at that as still there's something here. What can be a future potential? And what we ended up looking at is so Design Studio in the cloud, modern technology stack, and then again, this whole domain specific language. And those are the things that we leveraged. And we partnered with Microsoft actually last year to kind of play this out. I think, I think most of your audience falls into the same category I'm in, where I'm very dismissive of kind of these hype cycles on new technologies that are going to save the world. So the only way I was going to be able to kind of stand behind this is setting up a prototype and actually building something. And if I saw it work and kind of beat it up a little bit and it did what I was expecting it to do, okay, then I could kind of get behind this and see the potential. So that's what we did last year. We built a prototype that we showed at the Boston Automation Fair. And we worked through, out of all the use cases that we came up with, we narrowed it down to two main use cases to do in this prototype. One was, can I just ask questions of the product? Can I just ask, how do I do this in Design Studio? What does this mean? Explain this to me. And that was interesting. And you'll see in generative AI, a lot of people that want to have conversations against documents. They'll upload a document and they'll want to just ask questions. Summarize this for me. What is this? What is that? Well, that was kind of a low-hanging fruit use case. But what we wanted to turn towards was something we saw in GitHub, where GitHub came out with their Copilot roughly about the same time at the end of 2022 to help software developers. So we thought, boy, they're allowing code generation. They're allowing some really aiding software development. Can we do that for industrial, PLC languages? So that's what we did, allowing somebody to enter into an integrated chat panel within Design Studio, create me code to do this. And you could either be very specific and kind of light on your prompt, or you could be verbose. And what we found is it would generate code that I could directly bring into Design Studio. And again, we were trying to say, well, what's Rockwell's value add here? What are we doing compared to what these other generative AI products? And what we learned is something called prompt engineering. Prompt engineering is really how you allow essentially putting in guardrails or something that allows a very specific retrieval or generation of the response. So in this case, we built out a set of services that were examples of routines that we built.
Yeah.
So it's just nuance. A pump that starts with buttons, pumps with interlocks, kind of went for there and created all these different variations. We put that into a data set, like a database essentially. And then we had to build out a service that recognized the prompt. Did somebody ask to create code? Okay, what are they looking to create code for? So we had to recognize that context, recognize, create code. Let's say it's pump control. Then looking at our data set to generate something really brand new. Other services that we learned as part of prompt engineering, there's best practices. So if you use this instruction with it. Or if you use this instruction, don't use this instruction. So it was some of those best practices that are, for the most part, buried in a lot of materials, like on the Rockwell Literature Library, that you end up having these gems of best practices. Then we had to build a service that said these are all the instructions that can be used in the ladder editor. But then the biggest one, the last service, was the most critical, which differentiated us from ChatGPT, Gemini, any of the other bots, and that is the syntax of the code that's produced that has to be error free, that fits the syntax that I could use directly in my project.
Mhm.
And that was where we saw that was obviously the toughest thing to do. But that's what we built out as part of this prototype that we had in the innovation booth at Automation Fair, and really got a lot of attention, got a lot of people coming up to see that demonstration.
Yeah, we talk about generative AI in general a lot, and I kind of joke around with the audience. I'm like, you get the project you've been trying to get approved, and you can't. Just say you're going to include AI in it, and wow,
Right.
that'll get approved right away. And
Very
for
accurate.
yeah, and for condition monitoring or predictive maintenance, or for all these things that we know is so important, data collection and reporting, analytics, right? Vantage point style projects. They
Yeah.
all really do use AI, so it's not like you're lying, but some of those projects can be hard to push through. One of the problems when we look at a Chat GPT or one of these web-based AIs is there's the copyright issue. Almost everything they regurgitate you has been illegally stored in their database, and we see lawsuit after lawsuit. Major newspapers have sued these folks to take all their
Oh, yeah.
articles out of their database. We even put on our website, I should say, I even put on my website, the site's for humans. Do not train your AI on my website. So, but that's not a problem with a vendor like Rockwell. And like you mentioned, a literature library, sample code database. Just you guys have this wealth of knowledge. You're sitting on a gold mine. But the one thing that you need to do, so, I get to the knowledge base. I'm working on something. I need to know something. I go to the knowledge base, or somebody posts on my blog. I go to the knowledge base. And the knowledge base is great, but it doesn't encompass everything, right, that you guys have at your fingertips. And so what you're able to do is take your intellectual property, your decades of just valuable information, and like you said, start putting that in a nice database that can be accessed, almost like what Amazon did with Alexa, right? Or Siri did, over at Apple. You now have this database of knowledge that consists of just so much stuff you already have, but now it's connected and you can type it, and I'm sure someday talk to it, but you can type it in inside the editor and say, I know Rockwell has this great routine for, controlling pumps, right? So I have two pumps. I need to, alternate which one goes on each time they start. I've seen that somewhere. I'll just ask Rockwell's Copilot, and boom, it finds it for you. And I can even see that migrating to the knowledge base in other places, because it's just going to be so user friendly and user helpful and speed people's development time. And when somebody does that, do you also get like a description? Like it says, okay, here's some code, but is there any like breadcrumb or description of what you're seeing? Because I can imagine people could misapply code, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, it was a fascinating journey on the subjects that you covered there. As we were getting into this, we saw the copyright issues. We saw all these large language models that are purely trained on the internet, on
Yeah,
publicly available information. And then, like you brought up, some of them went past paywalls, like New York Times, Washington Post, and
exactly.
that's where it got kind of dicey. And so looking at, like you said, the amazing volume of information, and what we kind of characterize more as domain knowledge, that we could leverage in this kind of tool. Now, there's a really interesting paradigm, and I think I first heard it from Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, and he brought out that paradigm shift between kind of searching the internet versus having a conversation. So you put in something and you search, and you're going to get a series of links that your search is just going on to the next phase. Instead of giving another set of links, can you summarize an answer back? Can you give that high level answer back and then have a conversation with it? And that was one of the biggest areas we wanted to prove out the conversational nature of generative AI,
Mm-hmm.
where and it is that example of even when I brought up around prompt engineering, the best practices.
Yep.
So really what that'll evolve into is a very simple example where let's say you're building a logic system and you're having trouble and you talk to, let's say, whether it's a local expert, local subject matter expert, Rockwell, distributor, whomever, and you see they're able to come in and say, well, here's my rules of thumb, but this is how I look at this. And we're not going to replace those, but to have some of those nuggets at least pointing people in the right direction
Sure.
based on what might be a hidden gem, like I mentioned earlier, a hidden gem in this user manual. Or the other area is also, anything on the literature library, whether it's getting started guide, release notes, help files. We have a lot of, application notes that are just good. It it ends up giving more of a directional answer versus maybe the exact answer. It's pointing you in the right direction. Um, One area that to get back to where these data sets are from,
Mm-hmm.
so we created for the Design Studio Copilot is what we're calling it.
Sure.
We created our own, Rockwell built data sets, and we're going to grow in to include, whether it's the sample code library, but we have a ton of industry libraries, whether it's PlantPAX,
Yeah.
the machine builder library. Those will come in over time. But I know as we've talked to a ton of users about this, they would like their libraries to be used for code generation. And that's where we want to take steps to earn people's trust. If you want us to scrutinize, let's say, your library to understand what could be retrieved out, whether it's as simple as data types, naming conventions,
Mm.
or an add-on instruction, we want to make sure that we're taking the right steps to secure that. We're not feeding that into the great large language model for ChatGPT. We're creating a private instance that is only available in that tenant, but we're scrutinizing and keeping a separate database that is in Design Studio's control to say, well, if you want us to look at your AOIs, we want to scrutinize them so we know which one to pull out
Mm.
to insert into, let's say, the rest of the routine is new code, but we've placed your motor AOI, your pump AOI, your temperature AOI. That is your IP, but we want to make sure we're protecting your IP through a very secure architecture we're building.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. I can see how important that would be for very, very large customers that their
Yeah.
intellectual property is protected. And but then even some customers may like, I need this formatted for the pharmaceutical industry. Well, no, I need this formatted for the automotive
Uh,
industry. I need this formatted, so maybe it's a PAC-ML type application, or so there's
sure.
going to be different nomenclature used and different type of prefaces and prefixes and things that are common to different industries that will be used. So yeah, I can see that gets pretty deep pretty
The
fast.
one thing we have looked at, and you kind of mentioned it there, where let's say I'm building a system, I'm the system integrator, I'm going to leverage this. I have my own library of AOIs.
Hmm.
And but my project that I'm building wants to align more specifically with IEC 61131-3.
Hmm.
It wants a modular system. So what do we do now? We're really reading that standard and doing our best. But if that's even part of the data set to say, I want to be building against this standard,
Mm.
how can you understand the difference, especially when you have multiple people working on the same project? You have four people working on it, you're kind of getting four maybe variations to parts of it. So we see people looking at whether it's an industry standard, maybe it is even the spec from your end user that it's their spec. Are we all aligned with that? generative AI is really good at doing those comparisons across data sets to say, between these two, this grounding data that we've kind of locked in and the project, what's the difference?
Hmm.
And take that difference over time to say, we've got to build against the standard much closer. So that's really resonated with people as well.
Yeah, that's very interesting too, because yeah, customer specs could have you naming every PID a
Yeah.
certain way.
Mhm.
Every little thing has to have a particular naming convention so that the
Yeah,
people on the plant floor are familiar. They can just walk into any program and know exactly what they're looking at.
very
Um,
much.
wow, we've covered a lot of ground here today. Was there anything we left out, Tony, that you wanted to talk either Design Studio or generative AI and Copilot? Anything else you wanted to touch on those topics?
Yeah, I think for the specific point around generative AI, we did come out, so it's available right now. We came out with we're calling it product guidance in our April release. Somebody could go in there, again, no charge, go in and you could ask questions against Design Studio documentation.
Hmm.
And so that's available for people that just want to experience that in 107.
Okay.
The code generation and even explaining code, that's coming later this calendar year in a version 2.0,
Okay.
but that'll be a big part of our automation fair. But for your audience, if people just want to see maybe a lower risk engagement with generative AI, they could try out version 107. That's available for people right now.
Yeah, tell us about that free trial you're doing. I know you have a slide you want to bring up as well.
Yeah. I'll share out this slide. And what we're doing is when we released Design Studio, what we ended up doing is, as we're building out this new product introduction, we came out as a no charge subscription. So it's a yearly subscription. You're able to get access for a year. It's no charge. We'll be introducing a paid for tier later this year, but that's why it's no charge. It's not a trial. It's really you get a free entitlement, no charge entitlement. And the big difference that we'll have is we'll keep, for the most part, in the no charge tier, offline development, offline interactions. And in the chargeable tier will be the interactions where you're downloading to a controller, doing online monitoring, as well as this code generation for Copilot. That would be in the paid for tier. But this slide that I brought up, it is a QR code. If you scan that with your phone, it'll drop you into the Rockwell Automation FactoryTalk Design Studio page, and you'll see this large Try It Now button that if you select that, that'll take you in. We'll get some like name, rank, serial information from you, and then we'll process this no charge entitlement for you.
Yeah, for the audio audience, if you're driving along, this is very easy to remember. It's rock dot auto, AUTO, / FTDS, Factory Talk Design Studio, FTDS. So rock.auto / FTDS. Of course, if you're watching, you don't have to worry about that. And yeah, definitely, I would love to hear from you guys in the audience. Try it out. Let us know what you think. Let me know. Let Tony know. We'd love to hear what you're thinking out there. I know this is probably a higher end audience than what you would get at just a standard trade show floor. So I'd love to know what you guys are thinking. And if you're using other co-pilots from other people, how does it compare? Let us know what you think. I know other companies have cloud-based solutions, so we'd love all your feedback. I know Tony would. I've known him for a while and great guy, and he loves feedback. And I would love to know too, because I don't get to get out there and play with this stuff as much as I used to. So Tony, with that said, I just want to thank you very much for coming on the show. Did we cover anything? Did we miss anything?
No, I think we hit everything, Shawn. This was great.
All right, Tony. Well, thank you again. It's great talking to you as always, and thank you again for coming on the show.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode, and I want to thank Tony for coming on the show and bringing us up to speed on what Design Studio is. And I also want to thank him for sponsoring this episode. It was completely ad free. Did you notice that? So thanks. That goes out to Tony and Rockwell for sponsoring this episode. And because this is sponsored, you'll find some of the key links to this product in the description. Now, after we were done filming, Tony reached out and he said, "Hey, we got version 108 coming out on July 27th. And so I want to kind of go over with you really quickly what's in that update. So users will be able to manage access to specific FactoryTalk Design Studio operations with new role-based access control. In this first iteration, it gives users the ability to protect certain actions performed within the software by designating an admin who is responsible to assign roles based on the level of access needed for each user. So that's pretty cool. They're also including in this update enhancements to their Generative AI Assistant, FactoryTalk Design Studio Copilot. With a refined response time, users can now view responses in real time as the assistant generates an answer. And they're also integrating an Ask Copilot feature where users can troubleshoot errors in the output panel. So that sounds pretty cool too. Lastly, in this update, they have continued to expand the device offerings with the addition of the Stratix 2500, 5200, and 5410 switches, as well as the 1783 CSP. That's the SIP security proxy device. And the thought process is with the addition of these switches, it'll help customers better manage their networks and choose the right device for their network. And so that's the update they sent me over there. So that's a version 1.8 coming out on July 27th. And with that, I want to thank you all for tuning back in this week. I want to wish you all good health and happiness. And until next time, my friends, peace.